Richie and John to the free, where truth takes a stand. Richie and John, united hand in hand, champions of justice in colors so bright, fighting for queers, ensure wrongs are made right. With courage and pride, they rise against hate. In a world divided, they set the debate for diversity, equity, and inclusion's call. Stand tall with Richie and John, proudly for all. Buckle up, buttercup, we're here and we're loud. Champions of queer America, standing proud. In the face of the lies, they bring the light clear. For liberty and justice, they're always near. They counter the chaos, misinformation's demise. With hearts full of passion, they lift up the skies. Against the mango moron and MAGA's brigade, they shine through the darkness, their impact won't fade. With bravery and truth, they shatter the fears. In the name of LGBTQ citizens, they silence the jeers. For every voice silenced, they raise up their own. In their fight for freedom, resilience is shown.
The Mutual Broadcasting System presents Richie and John, the podcast that connects you with the people, events, headlines, and lifestyle interests of the global LGBTQ+ community. Here's Richie Roy and John McMullen.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Richie and John. We're trying something different today. I'm not wearing my headphones.
Oh my gosh.
It's a whole new vibe. But it's been a week. It's been quite a week in the world. And we thought that we would just kind of do a little bit of a grab bag, talk about stuff that affects everyone. For instance, I am having a glass of champagne to celebrate the end of the week, while I also can still get champagne, because who knows with tariffs how expensive that will be going forward.
Right. For sure. Yeah, I think everybody's concerned about not only how much things that come from outside of the United States are going to cost us now, but also how much we are going to really be punished by our investments that we have for retirement. This has been a crippling week because of all of the silliness around these tariffs that the United States president, the worst president in the history of presidents of anywhere in the world, has pulled off. And fortunately, one of our big trading partners, which is our neighbor to the north, Canada, I don't think he's going to succeed on that front, because it looks like there is effort to stop that happening in the United States Senate when the Republicans actually joined forces with the Democrats to get enough votes to make sure that Canada would not be punished unnecessarily by the idiot in chief.
Yeah. And who knows, maybe that's the first domino. Maybe we'll see some pushback on more of these tariffs. You know, the thing with the tariffs is there's been a lot of kind of reporting and discussion. Obviously, this is something that the president has talked about for a long time. He truly believes, because his brain is back, in like the robber baron era, that tariffs are a good idea. No economists think so. And it turns out that they probably didn't really even have economists helping them to put it in place. There are some folks who did some pretty interesting kind of reverse engineering. And what it looks very much like is that they literally put the question into ChatGPT and said, how do we do tariffs internationally? Because some of the weird stuff, like the way that, the island that's just penguins, some other countries that are listed have their own domain names, like their own top level domains. And so what they're thinking is they literally said, go through domain names and use that as the basis for setting up international tariffs by countries, which is why there are some weird ones in there. And they also calculated existing tariffs, or punitive economic measures that other countries have against the US through very rudimentary and incorrect numbers. The whole thing is based on just garbage in, garbage out, and is going to hurt absolutely everyone in the world.
This is so typical of something, though, that would happen under the watch of President or co-president Elon Musk. You know, his allegiance to the whole idea of the AI world and all that. I have no doubt that he was the one who planted this bug in the other guy's ears, the orange one, the mango moron. And, you know, when I read that, and thank God for sources like The Verge, which was the folks who originally did the footwork on this and decided to put the trade deficit data into, or the questions based on trade deficits into the chatbots or AI chatbots, and came up with essentially the same numbers that the president had at his little press conference in the Rose, or what used to be a Rose Garden, and that they came out with those same results. I laughed my ass off when I saw that. I was so dumbfounded, but I shouldn't have been.
Yeah. And the thing that's really wild to see is the breathtaking speed with which people who are in the cult have wrapped their heads around a clearly universally reviled idea. Because the same folks who were talking about egg prices are tweeting now, you don't need the latest phone. You don't need a new laptop. You know, just get a grip and, like, you know, adjust to the bumpy ride. And it's like, really? What about the bumpy ride with the eggs? You were not for the bumpy ride for the eggs. Like, you know, but of course they have to cognitively find a way to make this a good idea.
And what about the fact that they were going to be so smart that they were going to be the friend of big business, and big business includes companies like Apple and Samsung and others who resell their products. And, you know, once again, it's going to kick the economy in the balls.
Yeah. And the knock-on effects, I mean, if you just even take any one example, you know, like let's say the automobile tariffs, car prices will go up. Where do people buy cars? Local dealerships. Who supports local, you know, jobs? The Little League, the, you know, the sort of local industry, the car dealerships. And those car dealerships might not weather that storm. So that's one thing, you know. And then you look at even something like Nike, whose stock has taken an absolute bath because they do a lot of production in Vietnam, which was heavily hit with a very stiff tariff under this plan.
As does Adidas.
And Adidas, right? And so, you know, then your local sporting goods store, you know, suddenly people aren't going to want to buy their gym clothes anymore. That store is going to close. And just the ripple effect, it's not, you know, it's the stocks, it's stores, it's consumption, you know, you go down the line, it's really it's almost like they typed into Chat GPT, how do you kickstart a country into depression? And it spit out this answer, and they said, okay, let's do that.
Well, I know that we usually tell folks, look, we're the place where you can go and we're going to talk about things that are specifically LGBTQ. It's hard on a week like this to not look at this and go, okay, this is kicking the LGBTQ plus community's ass just the same way as everybody else in the country. But we thought it would be good to still talk about how we get through these things, what we can do about it, where we should be looking to spend our money or not, and what we need to do to stay involved and try and weather the storm until we get through, you know, to less stormy waters.
Yeah. No, and it kind of, all the things that we've talked about before about supporting businesses that support us still holds true, but it's going to look really different because, again, I think we're going to uncharted territories as to what things cost what, you know, for instance, and honestly, like global supply chains are so complicated that, let's say something like a Costco. We've talked about how much we love Costco. You know, they have good practices on diversity, equity, and inclusion, generally are sort of supporting the right things. Obviously, no company's perfect, but they're, of course, very heavily dependent on the status quo global economic model that has existed now and been, you know, largely successful for several decades. You know, who knows what the shelves are going to look like in Costco in 4 months? Again, assuming that these tariffs stay in place, because that's the other thing is the uncertainty, you know, for business. They're planning things on out years. When you're looking at like the automobile industry or semiconductors, they're still, the CHIPS Act, which was, under Biden, they're still in the early stages of getting those factories up and running. And so the runway is very long for all of these things. And when you're waking up and one day there's tariffs, the next day they're canceled or extended or who knows, there's a lot of investment that's just not going to happen. And meanwhile, you brought up the point, investments, people's retirement funds, people's long-term economic planning. Again, it goes to the fact that folks like Elon Musk think that Social Security should be privatized and just be market-based. What do we really?
Not this economy.
If your idea is to ruin the market and you want there to not be Social Security and people should just have Ks or whatever, what would that look like?
Well, some people probably think that this is a move by the administration to bring the market down so that they can take advantage of significant gains when it begins to grow back up again. But this is not the time to be doing this when people are scrambling just to be able to scramble some eggs.
Yeah, and I have to, I wonder about that because folks, I've definitely heard that theory that this is kind of a move to depress the economy and then oligarchs can buy things up cheap, and kind of do it that way. Maybe, but I also sometimes, every time that someone says anything like a 4-dimensional chess with regard to Trump, I'm like, no, he's just like, he's a kid that just flipped over the Monopoly board. He's not playing 4-dimensional chess. He doesn't even know what the chess pieces do. So, I'm not ascribing very complex motives for him. What I'm seeing is someone who has long believed in a widely discredited concept of how to do economics, and then a bunch of lickspittles and yes men who used ChatGPT to put together some slides for him, and they ran with it.
Well, the only thing I can say that I see as a positive in this, if there is a silver lining, is that there are people who are in his camp of cultists who are going to truly be hurt and are going to wonder what in the hell did he already had that with a group of people who were working for the federal government who were like, wait a minute, you were not going to take my job. You're going to take those people who don't do their jobs and who are wasting government resources. Yeah, it's not what they had in mind. And on top of that now, you're going to have people who are concerned about, if there's not a Social Security program to fall back on, and by the way, you killed the market too. So those who were among the 10% of Americans who were invested in the stock market, everybody's fucked. Unless you're in the oligarch club, you're fucked. And you know what? That's just like another place. It's just like this other huge country on this continent on the other side of the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean or Pacific Ocean, I guess you could say too. They stretch pretty far. It's a lot like the USSR, or I'm sorry, Russia. But it sure feels like we are headed towards the days of the USSR here in the United States.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of different things. What it feels like also is just, and I've seen some interesting articles to this effect, folks who have lived through essentially kind of failed state situations, whether in Eastern Europe or in South America, they're like, oh yeah, this looks super familiar, actually, like a feckless dictator who has bad policies and no one to really check his bad ideas. And then you just kind of and some of the articles are saying that life generally is weird it's just sort of inherently weird, often bad, and then sometimes normal, but then sometimes terrible. And it's just you have no stability and no sense on any given day of which it's going to be.
I was thinking the other day, which is always a scary thought, but I was thinking the other day about my 7th grade world history instructor, a guy named Cy Bass. And he was an old crotchety guy who every day would preach the greatness of one Ronald Reagan. And this is before he became president of the United States. This is back in the age when those people who were always afraid of the Reds, and I'm not talking about Cincinnati, but, he was always preaching the anti-communist stuff in class and would talk about how great someday Ronald Reagan's going to be as a president for our country because he's the one who's going to kill the communists. And I thought all the stuff that he ever told us about Soviet Russia and, how bad it was. And I remember thinking back then when I was, 13 years old, 12, 13 years old, thinking, God, how could a country ever let that kind of leadership, let Stalin become the leader of a country and, subjugate themselves to such a horrible way of life. And to think that here we are a quarter of the way through the 21st century and we've gone from having it not great, but pretty good to where we are today.
Mm-hmm.
It blows my fucking mind, Richie. It just absolutely is mind-numbing to me. How did we get here? And how did the American public get so stupid as to buy into his drivel?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. And I do think that it is a storm that has been a brewing for a while. I mean, even if you go back to look at something like a Reagan, I mean, a far cry from this absolute, piece of work. Yeah. But, Reagan, again, was an actor, not a particularly, policy-minded techno wonk. And it was really a cult of personality, with him. It's different by degree here because this is just a bunch of absolute lunatics. I mean, there was at least some idea that, that democracy was something of importance. Right. And I almost wonder if it's like after the fall of the USSR and this kind of unipolar world, that was basically, sort of, there wasn't the countervailing red scare, that people got kind of complacent and sort of thought, oh, well, democracy won, like we're the best.
This never happened to us.
Yeah, we're kind of done here. And then we just kind of like allowed this like slow slide into whatever we're at now. I don't know. I mean, people are going to have a lot of different ideas about it. The fact that we had this guy once and then we had someone who, by all measures, seemed to be a decent, kind person who was trying to right the ship and, from the first time, and people still were like, oh, that chaos and idiocy and like vindictiveness and small-mindedness and incuriosity, let's do that again. That's the part that like really is a head scratcher for me. Because let's even assume that people were just like, let's shake things up the first time around, let's try something different. But then just like the signing up for it again.
I know. I think that there's this thing about Americans where they love the story of people who fall from grace and then end up, making their way back. And it seems like this is something that repeats itself time and time again. That folks like to think about the fact that we grant people an opportunity to come back from their mistakes, but there was no mistaking that if this guy ever came back, he was going to not come back and do a better job in terms of a honestly better job, but that he was going to really come at his enemies and use every ounce of retribution his power allowed him to. And that's what we're seeing. And I'm glad that the courts have held up for the most part so far, but we haven't seen a real test, I think, yet of what's going to happen at the Supreme Court, but it's coming soon.
Mm-hmm.
And when it does, I'd be ready for a tidal wave.
Yeah. You have to wonder with Chief Justice Roberts, like what I would not want to be him right now, because I mean, really kind of like the constitutional existence, the kind of existential reality of the country kind of is hanging in the balance with the courts. Mm-hmm. And the lower courts are kind of holding fast. And even some of the circuit courts, on appeal are also kind of most of them are doing kind of the right thing. Even, appointees of, George W., George H.W., Trump, a lot of people who were not Obama or Biden appointees still at least remember enough from Con Law 1 to be like, none of this is good.
Right.
But, eventually, like you said, it's going to land at the Supreme Court. And this is kind of a Marbury versus Madison moment where the court is going to have to essentially say whether or not we still are a constitutional democracy or if we're some other thing. And knowing that they have very little power, to enforce things apart from people's belief in this system of government. That's kind of always been the thing, is that it's like this like magical thing, that if a court says you can't do this, then the president or the Congress is like, okay, we take what you said at face value and we won't do that or whatever. But if the president just says, well, fuck you, it's not like the Supreme Court has a military that they can dispatch to do anything. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. Well, something else, and I don't want to take us completely off this topic because it's obviously it is the news item of the week, but somebody else who made news this week, and it was not directly related to the LGBTQ community, but to me, it speaks very loud about how our representative form of government has gone completely awry beyond the office of the president, is an incident that happened with a United States senator from the great state of Indiana, where they think the N-word is still a valid adjective to use often. And Jim Banks made news this week in an elevator. I don't know if you saw that, Richie, but he was confronted by a gentleman who was, as the person speaking to him said, somebody who illegally lost their job. And the senator had some choice words for him, telling him that he probably deserved it. And when he said, whoa, wait, what do you mean I deserved it? And he said, well, you're a clown. And that would be the attitude of an elected United States senator towards somebody who had just been released from their job without any concern for what that person did or the impact that their work has on all of us as citizens of the United States, and did so in front of a video camera, was absolutely shocking to me. And I can only think that this guy thought that he would be okay to do that because, his Lord and Savior, Donald Trump, gets away with doing that all the time and still has a job. Mm-hmm. Unbelievable. Like, if I almost fear saying what I'm going to say, but if that was me, that would be kind of one of those stand your ground moments for me. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, the impunity, it's the impunity, and just the, like you said, just the kind of basic disregard for basically anyone that you don't value, that you just, decide you don't value. And that can turn on a dime, for instance, famously, the Republican Party has long cloaked itself in the American flag and, veterans and the armed forces and our heroes and all of that lip service. And as soon as Elon Musk and Donald Trump decided that they don't give two shits about veterans and slash the VA, when veterans come to them and say, hey, what are you doing here? The VA is essential to us. They're like, yeah, screw you. You're not a hero anyway. Like,
No,
so
remember, they're suckers and losers.
Right. And so no one is, that's the thing that I think a lot of people are learning, is that no one is actually safe, because they assumed that unless you were a trans athlete or a person of color, that you were going to be A-okay. And it turns out you're not. Whether you can be the most red-blooded, farming, Trump-supporting, gun-toting American, and they're still going to fuck you 6 ways to Sunday and not care. And and that's why, we see things like Speaker Johnson telling Republican, don't hold town halls anymore.
Yeah.
Because
it was nice this week to see that an inspector general at the Department of Defense is pursuing an investigation against Pete Hegseth and his incompetence and outright violation of law and protecting the American people from real threats.
Yeah. And that story, they're really trying to make that one go away, because that one really is galling. And it turns out, there was recent reporting this week that there were upwards of 20 other signal groups that had been set up by Waltz for various other operations. I mean, this is what happens when you have people who are not qualified basically cosplaying as high-level government officials, like I'm surprised that they don't have Fisher-Price walkie-talkies that they're using, that they're using Pig Latin to talk into, because it's as if they're children playing spy.
Yeah.
It's all just, I guess not, I was talking with a friend earlier today, there's so much to be concerned about and to be worried about and just uncertain about. But, trying to find that silver lining or whatever is tricky. I do think, to the extent that people feel, I guess, acute pain, they might over time start to think that maybe they've been sort of the frog in the pot ideologically for a while. And for some of them, it might be too late. And for some, they might just be too far into the cult to ever come back. But there might be people who are like, you know what, this party that I have been a member of for a long time, that stood for certain things, clearly doesn't anymore. And maybe I need to go elsewhere. And that might be the case even with Democrats, too. This might be a grand resorting, because I know a lot of folks on the Democratic side are just like, hey, you guys are like asleep here. I mean, when you look at, I know people, myself included, who were shocked when you look at this cabinet and the incredible incompetence and unqualified nature of every single person in it, and you look at how many Democratic members of Congress voted for them anyway, whether I guess to, go along and get along. I don't know why, because none of these people in their hearings, they came across as, prickly and stupid and, wrong-headed and you name it. To the idea that any Democratic legislator went along with any of them is, like, for me, a huge vote of no confidence in leadership. Or even just basic understanding of like what your power is. So, I think on both sides, I think there's going to be some real thinking about, to the extent that we do have a democracy left, who are we putting at the head of it? Starting at every level. Yeah. And maybe that'll be a good thing. I don't know. Like maybe we don't, like, obviously the Republican Party is moribund and is basically at this point just sort of a fascist arm of autocracy. But the Democratic Party is kind of like a little bit adrift as well. Obviously there are some thought leaders and some folks like AOC or
Eric Swalwell,
Cory Booker.
The senator from Connecticut, Chris, I'm forgetting his last name now, but he's been right out there on the front lines as well, trying to get people all over the country out and involved in a lot of the activism stuff. And it's great, and we need to continue to do that, and we need to not run away from this. We need to not move to another country and just give up on this place, because that's just not practical. Mm-hmm. Not for most people.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think it has been very invigorating for me to see, even here in my own small community of Palm Springs, the action that has come about as part of the resistance movement here. And the organizers are not giving up. The crowds are getting bigger. They're not getting smaller. They're getting bigger. And I live in an area where, yes, there are a ton of LGBTQ people. In fact, it's one of the highest per capita regions of the state of California for queer people. However, there are also a lot of Trumpers in this area. And we have a very mixed political checkerboard here in the Coachella Valley. And so seeing these people, many of whom in the past have been Republican voters who are also fed up with what's going on, and who, I'm fortunate enough to live in a community that you take away their Social Security and their Medicare, and I guarantee you the pot lid is going to blow sky high. Mm-hmm. People here are going to shit a brick, and they are. I mean, they're already doing it. And we're seeing the crowds that are gathering every Saturday in front of the local Tesla dealership are doubling every week. It's, and it was a group of gay people who actually got that movement starting out here. Mm-hmm. And the individual movement as well has been enormous in this region. And I hope we just continue to do that until we get to a point where the people who are really going to be able to create change, which to me are the people who are on Wall Street, because those are the ones who probably Trump fears the most and who fear him the most from what can happen. That's where I think the real civil war is going to happen, is going to be between 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and Wall Street. And when that does, I fully expect that people who are real billionaires are going to win that game, not these world's richest man with the world's wannabe the richest man, which is where I think we're at right now. And I swear, when somebody doesn't get their bonus this year on Wall Street, they're going to find a way to get inside that gate at that white mansion in central Washington, D.C., and create some havoc.
Well, you've got to.
I think elected leaders in this country need to be very worried about their safety. And I don't say that lightly, and I don't wish that anybody gets shot at, but I think that we are about to enter an era where people are going to have their backs pressed to the wall like never before, and we've never been armed in the general public before like we are now. I think you're not going to have to worry about school kids as much as you're going to have to worry about elected officials pretty soon.
Well, and you won't have to worry about school kids because they're defunding schools left and right. So there won't be any schools. So the kids will just be working in the sweatshops, to make the Nike shirts, since we can't get them in Vietnam anymore. But yeah, I mean, your point is well taken, that people are going to get frustrated, and especially when you start getting folks frustrated, because when you look at kind of the folks who have propensity towards that type of violent act in our past has, when you look at the general timbre, it's usually someone on the right, because they're more likely to be armed, just generally speaking. And, it's just that's just sort of demographically how it's broken down. But when that population gets angry at the people who they previously liked, that's going to be different. That's the difference, because it's not necessarily at this point going to be directed at the people of color, the trans folks. I mean, when their ire is
all of a sudden it's going to be, boo-hoo, you lied to me. Oh my God. And they said that you lied to me, but I wouldn't believe them. And now I have to believe the goddamn liberals.
So it's going to be,
I'm getting my popcorn.
Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, in the meantime.
And yes, by the way, I want to tell our audience, that is Dumbass's head that you see on the bottom of your screen at the top, or the bottom of my shirt. That is his head. And I think I should show off the whole thing.
I think you should. Yeah.
Okay, there it is. He is a rapist.
Why don't you tell, for folks who aren't watching but are just listening, what does it say?
It has the mango turd on the shirt, and over it, it says in big, bright red letters, it says in huge letters, IST. But before that, there's the letters that make up racist, rapist, fascist, terrorist, narcissist, misogynist, and get the gist? 8647 now. Let's get rid of him now. And it's got the Richie and John logo on it as well. So if you'd like one, you can send us a note. Just drop me a note at john@richieandjohn.com, and I will be happy to send you the details on how you too can end up with one of these shirts.
Yeah.
And no, we're not selling them at a profit. We're only selling them at cost so that as many people as possible can have them. We're not looking to profit off of them. We're looking to get a message out into our community. Because the more people who have to confront who he really is, because all of these things that it says, these ists, they're all true. And he hates that. He just absolutely hates that he can't argue that they're all true. The rapist president, the rapist. A rapist is your president. Did you vote for him? Did you vote for a rapist? Really? A rapist president. Yeah. A judge said so. A judge says that, by technicality, he wasn't a rapist in the context of being convicted of a felony rape charge, but the civil equivalent of that, he was adjudicated by the entire jury of essentially raping E. Jean Carroll in a department store. What a fucking piece of shit. What if that was your mom, your grandma? How would you feel about it then? He's a sick bastard. And all the other things, just they're, as far as I'm concerned, all of the other names that go along with the ists, those are all bad too. Racist, misogynist, etc. But rapist is the lowest of the low.
Yeah, and it's just the thing that I've always found just shocking about it, though, is to go back even before E. Jean Carroll, the Access Hollywood.
Oh, yeah.
That was like the first little taste, and that people ultimately.
I remember hearing elected officials on the right who came out and said when that came out, I remember the guy from Utah who was talking about the fact that he could not look his daughter in the eye and say that he supported that guy, and other electeds who said similar things. And then, of course, they turn around and they kiss his ring, kiss his ass ring. And here we are. We have a rapist, racist, misogynist, narcissist, motherfuckerist as our president. And look what he is doing to our reputation around the world. And he's making each and every one of his 350 million citizens pay the price for it. National security is in the toilet because of what he is doing. And you can't even take care of yourself at this point when he does everything within his power to have the carpet pulled out from underneath you just to survive day to day.
I think it is something that we knew about. We knew this all along.
Yep.
Because the thing is, he has always shown himself to be the same person. Whether it was, in the first administration, before that, from day one, he will sell out and throw under the bus his closest ally, partner, friend, whatever. And those are people who he likes and people who he, who suck up to him, let alone people who don't meet that threshold. He does not care about the well-being of any single person on this planet except for his own ego.
Yeah.
And his ego has been, his ego has been damaged. It was damaged when he didn't win re-election. It was damaged. He's so thin-skinned every time, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, every protest where people had, the balloon of him, with the diaper, and so he's lashing out. And
even when Roger Waters was here in concert several years back, right around the time that he was getting elected the first time, and he was here performing at the Coachella and Stagecoach grounds for Desert Trip, he had a pig flying around over the crowd as he was singing and referring in not the most gleeful of ways about Donald Trump.
Right.
And, Richie, I love having friends who are really smart people. I surround myself with people like you, who are people who are lawyerly and have gone to some of the greatest schools in our country. And I like being around really smart people. I have to say, I never really thought of myself as being one of the really smart people because I was just a B-, C+ student in high school. And yet I think about it today and I go, there are 71 million people in America who are F- people in this world. I don't feel so bad because of them. I just have to live through all the bad because of them. And we've got to stick together. So even if you didn't think you were that smart, so long as you didn't support him in any way, shape, or form, you're pretty goddamn smart as far as America goes.
Yep. So, I think, we thought it would be an interesting sort of little experiment here on this Substantial Saturday to kind of be a little more freeform and again, kind of go a little bit off of our format. Because usually, as you know, Newsday Tuesday is about the LGBTQ plus news that you need to know. And Substantial Saturdays, oftentimes, we'll do interviews. But, there's just, this week has been so momentous, I think, even as every week has been crazy. But I think this has been so sort of, I think, just a global shift, and something that's
Richie and I have to just verbally vomit. So deal with it.
Yeah. And so, we're doing something a little different. We'd love to hear your thoughts on any of this, and we, again, would love for you to go to richieandjohn.com and you can find ways to reach us there. We have a phone number, 878-768-8825. And, with that number, use it or lose it, because we're not going to keep that number around if you're not going to call that number. So call that number.
We're going to give it to some hungry children that need a phone somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's going to be a hell of a lot more of them the way things are going.
Right. So call the number, go to our website, reach out, let us know how you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you'd like for us to.
Substantial Saturday next week, we're going to have a real American LGBTQ hero with us. We're going to have Dr. Greta Kammermeyer come back and join us, and that'll be fun. We'll talk with her about how things are going with all of this as it relates to all of the military issues. Again, we won't be talking only about military. She's a very active Democratic activist up in Washington State as well, and we'll get her take on a bunch of stuff. But she will be here. Also, just so you know that Richie and I didn't just do this show by the seat of our pants. We did have a plan. Kathy Renna from the National Lesbian, Gay, Bi, Trans, Queer Task Force was planning to be here, and unfortunately something came up at the last minute, and we'll try and get her back on the show real soon.
Absolutely. So yeah, more to come. But in the meantime, have as great a weekend as you can. Enjoy the spring. If you feel like you need to go stockpile imported cheeses, I understand. I'm probably going to do the same. But
remember, on that note, don't forget that Costco is the place to buy your toilet paper, and probably also some of the other things that are going to, start costing you a lot more.
It's true.
But at least it'll be going someplace where they actually care about your diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Absolutely. So until next Tuesday, we hope you have a great time, and we'll check in with you then.
Have a nice weekend, Richie.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on Richie and John. This podcast is a production of the Mutual Broadcasting System and is available at richieandjohn.com, as well as most major podcast portals, including Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Spotify.
With courage bold and voices clear, for life, liberty, happiness, they persevere. Never in the shadows, they stand tall. For truth and freedom, they answer the call. Richie and John, hear the world echo your name. Fighting for justice, lighting freedom's flame. Champions of diversity, truth in the night. In the battle for equality, they're ready to fight. And as the fight goes on, from sea to shining sea, Richie and John, you're the voice of the free. Keep shining bright, your impact will grow. The world stands with you on the Richie and John Show.